Good morning. My name is Randy Schellenberg, president of ComforTek Seating. Thank you for taking time to join me today in this webinar entitled Why Seating Innovations Matter. Maybe more specifically, it's why seating innovations designed to reduce the physical demands of caregivers matter. My story begins one Christmas when an uncle asked me, why couldn't he enjoy a meal with his wife? I asked him, why can't you? He went on to describe the fact that his wife had lost mobility. He was a senior in his mid-80s and didn't have the strength that he used to have. And so they weren't able to get up to the dining table. And so they sat in the family room, he on the couch, and she in a lift chair. He went on to describe, he says, what you baby boomers sometimes forget, he said, pointing a finger directly at me, is that today's seniors grew up in the 1930s and 40s. For us, the kitchen table was the heart of our home. It was where everything happened. It's where we had our meals, we did our homework, we had family gatherings. That's where we had to bring our boyfriends and girlfriends in terms of being able to meet the family. Why can't we just get back to the dining table and enjoy a meal together in our senior years? That took me on a journey to study chairs. How do we use them? What's their purpose? What's the form or the function? We looked at features that are required. I looked at the mobility, the independence. What features would caregivers like to see in a chair? Any innovations that I was able to identify focused very much on fabrics, foam, and finishes, and had nothing to do with making the chair easier to move or making meal times safer or more enjoyable. Does this look familiar? If meal times are supposed to be the highlight of the home, why are they so difficult? Why are there so many injuries and incidents of falls that occur associated with mealtime assistance? What experience do you have? Do you relate more to the person that's seated in the chair, or do you relate to the person that's standing behind the chair, the one that has to apply all of the effort? Simply stated, meal times are difficult because as we age, we lose our mobility. And with the loss of mobility, our reliance on family and friends and caregivers increases. You and I, looking at that top line, typically get seated at a chair by positioning the chair ourselves between the chair and the table. We get seated, we lift the chair slightly as we scoot ourselves forward. The same steps have to occur in terms of somebody that's using a walker or a rollator or somebody that's lost their mobility. It's just that the caregivers now is required to provide the muscle in each of those stations. They're the ones that help us get seated. Once seated, they're the ones that somehow have to move the chair and position ourselves up to a table. No wonder caregivers feel more like hired muscle than givers of care. So how much effort does it take to move a seated person up to a table? According to Occupational Health and Safety's guidelines, caregivers should not be expected to lift more than 35 pounds in the process of providing care. Science, however, tells us that to move a 200-pound person, it takes somewhere between 80 and 140 pounds of force just to be able to slide, skid, or push them up to a table. Even chairs that are fitted with front casters require an extension on the arms if you want to reach the 35-pound amount of effort. Essentially, and this is what my uncle understood, caregivers are at risk of incurring a work-related injury each time meal assistance is provided. Unfortunately, chairs provide little assistance. There's been little innovation in terms of seating for the last number of years. By design, chairs do not move. Chairs rely on friction to remain stable and structurally sound. Cushioned flooring, developed to reduce the severity of concussions or falls, also increase the friction because now each leg of the chair is stuck inside its own pocket. Even chairs that had casters attached to the front legs of the chairs were designed for an independent person to pull themselves forward to a table, and certainly not designed to make it easier for a caregiver to move a seated person up to a table. As a result of the fact that chairs are not designed to move instinctively, caregivers place the chair as close to the table as they possibly can knowing that once the person is seated, they'll be expected to provide whatever muscle is required to move the person up to the table. The first step is to get someone seated. And you can see that we have the trip zone is that area that you need to navigate through in terms of being able to get somebody to shuffle sideways, step backwards, and lean on the table for support as they get into that particular chair. And then once seated, the caregiver is expected to lean on the chair and somehow maneuver the chair to be able to get them positioned directly at the table. Seating innovations, which reduce the interference caused by the table, should include chairs that have the ability to have a seat that swivels and locks. Should be a chair with features that include a seat that swivels and locks and the chair that rolls and brakes for safety. And then C, a chair that has the ability of rolling and braking for safety. So let's look at these chairs in more detail in terms of seeing what do they actually do when it comes to getting a person seated at the table. As you can see in this slide, the chair on the extreme left is a standard chair. It's positioned at the table, typically the way we'd place it. And you can see that the trip zone has been identified. And so the risk of injury and fall is high. Chairs that have a seat that swivels and locks is mobility option A. And you can see that by rotating the seat 90 degrees, you have full access to the seat of the chair. The interference with the table is removed. The individual still is required to back themselves into the chair, but they're doing so having full access to both arms. They can be seated, and once seated, they can be moved up to a table. Mobility option B has a seat that does exactly the same thing, but the chair is able to roll or be pulled further away from the table should you require assistance from a second caregiver. If you have a caregiver that's assisting a person on both sides, you can have both of the individuals stand in between the chair and the table, etc., without any interference, have the person be seated, and once seated, you again swivel the chair towards the table and slide them into position. Mobility option C, it goes in a slightly different direction where we're actually trying to completely eliminate preventing falls that occur at mealtime. And here you can see that the chair can be maneuvered completely away from the table, and we go directly up behind a standing person, and all they're expected to do is to just sit down, because once they're seated, then we can move them back into position at the table. Let's watch a video on each of these and see if you can just fully appreciate or contrast the difference between mobility option A, B, and C. Mobility option A, the seat swivels and locks for safety. In this particular case, the caregiver is releasing the trip lever and turning the person towards the table. In reality is, as long as the individual has the skills, they are able to do that on their own. But again, you can appreciate that there's literally no interference with the table as you have full access to the seat of the chair. Mobility option B, we have a seat that swivels and locks. In this case, the seat is already swiveled and locked at 90 degrees, and it is pulled away from the table. And that just allows more room for the person to be seated. Once seated, the caregiver is able to engage in conversation, making sure that there's nothing surprising that's happening, and gently guide the person till they are facing the table. Once in position, the brakes are released, and the caregiver is able to move them into complete position at the table. Why step backwards or shuffle sideways when it's both safer and easier to move the chair and not the person? And so in this particular case, you can see that with the chair caddy attached to the bottom of the chair, the caregiver is able to bring the chair directly to the standing person. Once the person is seated, then it's a matter of the caregiver being able to position them directly up to a table. Once in position, again for added safety, the brakes can be attached. There are several different versions of Model C. Here we have a chair again that operates in exactly the same fashion, but what we've done is we've added a side-mounted brake assembly that allows both the caregiving spouse and the seated person to be able to access it. So it just provides another increased sense of independence for the individual that is being assisted. You can see that the brakes are being locked. The individual is able to be just seated. Again, no stepping backwards, no shuffling sideways. But once seated, they can participate in the process of being able to release the brakes and have themselves moved up to a table. You'll also see in here as the meal concludes that the seated person is able to release the brakes, and using their hands and feet, they're actually able to self-propel themselves away from the table, again, relying on the caring spouse to move them directly into position at a table. Once standing, they walk straight away from the table. Another version of the C-Mobility is literally the chair caddy as an attachable piece to the base of any chair. So you can see on the right-hand side, we've got several different styles of chairs to which the chair caddy can be attached. The chair caddy adjusts both in terms of width and depth. You've seen exactly how the brakes are able to rotate, or the casters rotate, and the brakes can be applied. And again, once it is attached to your chair, the chair has the ability of being able to roll 360 degrees and brake for safety. Why these innovations matter and who benefits. I want to identify 3 different individuals that benefit significantly from having these innovations within their care community. Care staff. Immediately, they realize a reduction in workplace injuries. They enjoy a healthier home and work-life balance as they have more energy left at the end of the shift. And that allows some of their soft skills, the compassion and the empathy and the tolerance, to become more evident as they're not having to focus on how much effort do I have to provide in terms of moving a seated person up to a table. If you play the role in terms of administration and you're looking at the operational side of it, just remember that not every chair is damaged and not every chair requires a chair caddy. From our experience, caddies need to be applied to 2 chairs out of 10. Thus, for just a fraction of the cost of a new floor or full replacement of all chairs, a care community can benefit from these innovations. As an example, a 50-bed care community would require less than $4,000 to be able to incorporate this into their system, as they would mount the chair caddy onto 10 to 12 of their chairs. It matters to human resources, as early retirees may be welcomed back to work, as the physical demands of the job are now in keeping with who they are, and staff continue to appreciate management's proactive approach to a very real mealtime issue. We all know from experience that none of us are supposed to surprise or approach a senior from behind. And yet, that's exactly what we do when mealtime assistance is required. The innovation of the chair caddy enables the caregiver to focus on developing a relationship bond with each senior as the physical demands of providing meal assistance is reduced. The option here is move the chair, not the person. Again, you can appreciate that after the brakes are released, the individual is moved back directly in terms of their walker, and they are able to simply stand and walk straight away from the chair. So much of senior care is personal and private and intimate. And while families appreciate knowing how care will be provided, these efforts cannot be showcased. Mealtime activities, however, are public and they're open to all. And as you observe the motions that are required in terms of getting somebody seated at the table, I encourage you to use this time to build up the esteem and self-worth of each of our seniors. they can participate in meal activity without being isolated, without being singled out. It just makes it that much easier for them to become part of the group. Again, if you're participating in a community dining situation, how do you get a seated person moved into some of those in-between seats? That's what the chair caddy enables you to do. We've included a few additional resources here. Once you receive a copy of this recording, you can download any of those items. The top button is Taste and See. To fully understand the impact of the chair caddy within your community, we have a Taste and See program. That might be a good way for you to start in terms of being able to get a caddy mounted on one of your chairs and test it with your staff. Our goal in designing these chairs was not to design a chair that rolls easily. Those already exist in the form of a 1970s dinette chair or a task chair, both of which are considered dangerous and not suitable for use by seniors. Rather, our design criteria was to incorporate features which balance the additional needs, the need to prevent falls and the need to reduce the physical demands of staff, and to do so without compromising safety for either the seated person or the caregiver. To what extent did we achieve this balance? I'm not sure. What I am sure about, however, is that the greatest appreciation of these benefits will be evident in the lives of cherished loved ones as they experience an increased sense of dignity and self-worth. In closing, I invite you to listen to Harry and Sally's story. Harry and Sally, like my uncle, found it difficult to enjoy each other's company at mealtime. The chair caddy changed everything for them, enabling them to live the life the way they want.
As I get older, I'm not able to move around like I used to. What I didn't expect was that mealtime would become so difficult. We really enjoy each other's company.
Mealtime used to be such a highlight for us. Today, Henry isn't so sure on his feet anymore. Sometimes I feared he might fall as he leans heavily on the table, just getting seated. And I was exhausted from having to push him up to the table at every meal. But the chair caddy changed everything for us. Meal times are once again our favorite time of the day.
The caddy attached to my favorite chair. Sally can position my chair behind me, and then after applying the brakes, she helps me as I get seated.
Then I simply release the brakes and wheel him to the table with almost no effort. No stress, and I don't have to worry about hurting myself.
When we're done, Sally releases the brakes and wheels me away from the table.
Probably the best part of the chair caddy for us is knowing that we will be able to stay in our home longer. It's easy, it's safe, it's changed our lives.
I may have lost some of my mobility, but we feel like we're able to live the life we want.
Thank you again for your time. Thank you also for everything that you do for today's seniors and caregivers. I trust we will be in contact soon. Thank you again. Have a great afternoon.